site. And so you can see that we are going to actually look at a couple of the aspects of immersive reality. And once we started to look at what exists for donors and what is immersive reality, it's really the opportunity to actually take yourself and insert yourself into a place that is virtually created and that provides the sense of what could be, what is going to be created, or what is there that will allow me to go and explore this space even further. The we know and we've seen virtual reality, from goggles that people would wear to actual art installations like a Van Gogh or a Matisse, that you can actually walk into a space and then be surrounded by that. But with the internet, what we've actually seen is how immersive reality can allow an individual, from the comfort of their own home, from their smartphone devices, from their tablets, that they can actually immerse themselves, and you can actually communicate with your donors and your prospects so that they can get the sense of being a part of what it is that you are envisioning to create or have. So imagine that you're a museum and you're looking at creating an exhibition, but that exhibition hasn't been built yet. You need to raise the funds for it. One of the beauties of immersive reality is being able to actually take that vision and actually provide and then build that out. And today, when you're starting to look at building things out, it's not as complicated as it once was. Basically working with a blueprint, recreating the blueprint into a two-dimensional, three-dimensional site that individuals can actually go into and experience, is part of the magic of this immersive reality experience. And what we're always looking for is, how can we be creating these new points of contact, these new connections and interactions that your donors, your prospects can actually see for themselves without ever going to your site. In some cases, there's nothing to see, but this is the opportunity for them to be actually taking part in this. And so when we start to think about, how can we be looking at immersive reality for naming opportunities? When we start to think about naming opportunities, we're always looking at it as, how do we talk to a donor and show them impact? How do we show gratitude to the donors and not make it seem as if it's a commercial transaction? So when we start to think about it, we're starting to look at it from that type of a perspective. And the ability that immersive reality provides around naming opportunities is that, and this is where we're going to be sort of touching on as we move through this, is to look at, how do we bring this to life? How do we bring that naming opportunity to life so that anyone can actually go and experience and see? And if they like it and it matches what their priorities are with the priorities of your organization for what you're raising funds for, if you can match those priorities on an immersive basis, then you're starting to see how this starts to fit together. Imagine using language like, let's meet the Smith family lab. So you can actually just go into that Smith family lab and see what's taking place in that lab, or an emergency room, or in a hospice. But one of the things that adds validity to this is Russell James. So for those of you who know Russell, for those of you who don't, Russell is a professor at Texas Tech University. He does extensive research in the area of neuroimaging. Basically, he takes individuals, puts them on an fMRI bed, and measures their brain activity when they see certain things that are being communicated to them, and how their brain activity sparks up when it's a comparison between a flat image, an image that has several different, dimensions to it, or a 360-degree panoramic view of something. So if we start to look at this as helping and advancing purchase decisions around their brain activity, the same holds true if it's a purchase decision or it's a donation. And a donation in many cases it's a transaction that takes place, but it's an emotional transaction, just like this Russell James's research in terms of purchase decisions. And when he starts to look at doing that 360-degree view of an article of clothing, of jewelry, of any other type of material item, that he saw an increase in engagement and communications that included VR imagery. And James, when you start to look at it, these are other examples of purchases that would be influenced by visualization, illustration, engagement.
I think what you're adding to it, and this holds for naming opportunities as well, is beyond the transactional value, there's an intangible value. And that intangible value is what gives high-end products like Gucci and Hermes and so on their appeal. The craftsmanship is certainly there, but the price doesn't really reflect that. It's a psychic reward that really allows you, I'm going to use a word that was hot a couple of years ago, to co-create with the donor what the value of that and meaning is for that donor of this. So, you might dream of owning a luxury product because it gives you that psychic reward. I'm sure Russell's research shows lots of brain activity around things when donors get excited about a central piece of a hospital or a professorship in an extremely important emerging area, or naming an honors college at a university because their daughter was a graduate from there and has done exceedingly well. So I think all these intangible things play into that, let's call it the luxury segment of naming opportunities.
Do you have any water?
And James,
the AC's off.
Yeah,
Um,
still relatively cool.
you gotta love Helen, eh?
so one of the aspects of these products or these brands is the ability to actually look at and draw a comparison between a new urgent care clinic. The difference is this is a premium product. This is a priority for the hospital. This is not just a priority for the hospital, it's also a priority for the community. So when we start to play around a little bit with language, when we start to talk about these are our donor opportunities, these are our naming opportunities, these are our needs, this is our statement of need. When we change that around and we start to look at these are our priorities. I just met with one of our projects, and they were looking at redoing their website, and they were focusing on areas of need. And so I said, how about if you flip this around a little bit? On your site, on your foundation site, why don't you, instead of having areas of need, you have your priority funding areas. And if a donor were to come to your priority funding areas, the likelihood of them picking an area that matches their priorities. So when we're always looking at the psychology of the donor, we're looking at them from their values, their views, their interests, and their priorities. And this is all part of the whole cultivation, but if we can be demonstrating what the priorities of the institution are, whether it's, as you described, a professorship, whether it's a clinical researcher in another part of the country, that we can actually be recreating and immersing that donor into their lab, and you can actually see that lab. And there may be labs across the country, if not around the world, which are next to impossible for people to go and visit. So in this instance, where like this new care clinic is what's high priority, high value, Gucci, Versace, or anything along those lines, Nike. But we start to look at a new urgent care clinic. Well, this is a high priority, and many of the individuals that you're going to be approaching may have needed urgent care, but it wasn't there. And this is an opportunity to build something and showcase something that will be there if it has the right donor interests, because those donor interests were piqued by personalized experiences. And that personalization of the experience is going to drive that emotional connection through storytelling. And we always talk about storytelling with donors, but in most cases, the storytelling with donors is done one-on-one. And we eventually will get to the one-on-one, but we want to scale our storytelling. How can we be taking this to the masses, just like a brand name consumer product would be taking things to the masses? So when we go from that into, how does this help? How does this enable a donor to actually understand through these visualizations, this immersive reality, the complexity of what it is that you're looking at creating? James, when you start to look at, what spaces are appropriate, for naming, how do we come up with those spaces? How does that all fit together? This is one of those areas that this speaks to in a very efficient way, an effective way with donors.
And when you're designing those pricing models, if you want to call them that, this gives you the ability to interact with the donor around that as well and respond to needs and questions. If it's, say, a hospital area that they're familiar with in research or in patient care, they may have some ideas around that, which, adds to the value of it. So, we usually publish lists of things like you can name this space for 5 million, or you can name this space for 7 million. But if you start with a conversation around what the space does, what it delivers, in those meetings, this virtual immersion, I think, can really allow a lot of donor interaction and additive value by getting the feedback from the donors rather than showing up with some presentation book saying, here's what we got for $5 million. So it's that two-way transaction now becomes multidimensional, right?
The ability to actually have that conversation as well, it can be embedded into the immersive reality. So just picture going into this space, and I'll give you an example of Mike. So Mike was looking at making a $50,000 donation. Great donation. He's never given to this organization before. The organization met with Mike, began to show him and immerse Mike into the plans that they had for their new building. So Mike began to look at it, and the first thing Mike began to do was click around and see for himself that there were areas that really touched on his personal experience with the healthcare system. His mother had dementia, and there was a memory care unit. And when Mike clicked on the memory care unit, he was immersed into it. He saw the 4 rooms. He saw the family rooms, the safe garden area, and all of that. And so when he started to play around with it, then he clicked on and saw that it was a $500,000 naming opportunity. So Mike was like, I'd love to do this in my mom's name. The conversation, then he says, but it's a $500,000. I was thinking of 50,000. He began to look around and understand that there may be opportunities, and this is where the conversation led into the affordability of making a donation from various assets. When he saw that he could do it instead of writing a check for 50,000, he began to look at the ability to actually make this donation out of appreciated assets. And he was then able to actually take that and share it with his accountant and his financial advisor right then and there on the spot. So he didn't have to talk to anybody else about the donation other than his advisors. There was no one else in the decision-making process. But having this type of 3D visualization with the different elements that are a part of this was very fundamentally beneficial, not only for Mike, but benefited the organization as well, and allowed everyone to become more informed about the decisions. And this in itself helped streamline the process. So the idea of, just picture how we do this. Traditionally we'd have the meeting with Mike. We'd be happy to have his $50,000. There would not be that immersive. They might look at a couple of images, but that would be kind of it. Then he might get those images, then call his advisor, call his accountant, call his financial planner, and then try to set meetings up with them. What he was able to do right then and there was to actually interact with all those people, get them on a call, and then start this process in motion. And realistically, within the organization, within the span of a couple of weeks, was able to have that donation secured. And in many cases, it probably would have been a couple of weeks to actually get in front and have a meeting with the accountant. Maybe another couple of weeks to have the meeting with a financial advisor before everything was done. The efficiency and the effectiveness of utilizing immersive reality, but connecting it back to our original slide of how connection is so important, how quick connection is, and how people respond to it is important. But when we start to talk about, where we're going with this, again, James, like looking at plaques on a wall, that what does that evoke for you? And when you start to look at this, when you start to think about all the brass plaques that you've seen or the names on spaces, do you kind of, where could we go with this?
One of the things I've noticed with the virtual plaques as well is the lists can get quite long. So naturally, you can tell fundraisers when they walk into a hospital, they're the ones reading the donor board. But you got to stand there a long time now because they've got everybody listed on there. And with this, I think you're adding a much more visual element that evokes some level of engagement that a plaque and a recognition kind of thing doesn't necessarily do. It's great to have those kinds of things, but I think previewing how the spaces will look, what they'll be used for, and keeping them engaged throughout that project life cycle it doesn't end there, right? Because once they make a $500,000 gift, they're your friend for life. So you're always going to be stewarding them and always taking them into that delivery of impact that occurs around this. So, I think you say, what do I get for $50,000? Well, put your name on a plaque on the wall. This goes well beyond that, and I think allows for much more substantive engagement opportunities than just that simple recognition.
It's really interesting. Where does stewardship and where do naming opportunities fall within the spectrum of the development office? Whether it's a one-person executive director just doing everything, including fundraising and donor recognition and on, or it's a large operation. And the ideas of stewardship and naming opportunities. Well, in many instances, you've got to have a donor, whether it's a major gift, an annual donor, a planned giving donor, to actually do a naming opportunity for. But when we start to look at it as a holistic exercise, one of the things that we're like, whose responsibility is naming opportunity and stewardship? But does it fall into the annual giving? Because that's where we found that as well. Does it fall with the person who's got the relationship with the donor on major gift side, or the planned giving? Or is it a new category on the donor research side, that this new area of of donor research is also tying into donor stewardship. So we start to look at whose responsibility and who has the relationship, and how do we actually account for the where the plaques are, who the names are, where the families are. And I know that organizations are really looking at the back end of that, and how can sort of families and the relationship with families be continually associated with the organization and the people within the organization. So we know that over the last number of years, there's been a high turnover rate in organizations. Then who picks up the pieces on donor recognition and stewardship all the way along? Is there, the beauty of what you described, James, of walking into a place and you actually see all the names on the wall, whether it's a digital wall or where they're brass plaques or whatever it may be. But virtually, in perpetuity, being able to actually have people's names if they go and visit and go immerse themselves into a project, whether it hasn't been built or it's been built. And you go into those different beacons and click on the beacons, and you're going to see the names of the donor for that beacon, for that room, for that space, for that wall, for the whatever it happens to be, the exhibit, and how those individual names will be there in perpetuity. So you don't have to necessarily go to the site. You don't have to go to the campus. You can actually go and actually experience what's taking place there, who gave, a little history about those individuals. Like I used the example of the Smith Family Lab, something about the Smith family, something about them, why they made that donation, because that's the impact that we talked about early on. That's the gratitude that the family will have in perpetuity. And that's the leverage that you as an organization will have, because it'll personify who are the people that are associated with your organization and how best to recognize and identify those supporters of yours. Anything you want to sort of add to that?
I think that sums it up really well. I mean,
Yeah.
Spot on.
So you want to just describe, this type of a typical naming opportunity. We're coming into a space. It's an MRI department. You can have the corridor. This is a beacon that you could click on. You can go over here and click on the naming opportunities, and it'll come to life. It'll open up. It'll explain what the corridor is, what the reception desk is, what is taking place here. It has that level of interactivity. So when we go back to that immersive reality, what we're really looking at is creating that opportunity for interaction so that your campaigns can be brought to life. So when we start to look at your naming opportunities come alive, and this is where your campaigns come alive. But it's ongoing, real-time recognition, and those are opportunities that can be nicely shared amongst friends, amongst the community, and you can learn about how their priorities tied in with the funding priorities of the organization or institution. The neat part about this, is once you click on the naming opportunity, you're going to have the narration. It's your case for support comes to life. So you take the words in your case for support and you frame it in such a way that it starts to be transformed and gets that further level of engagement.
This is really, I mean, it's when you look at it from the perspective of the fundraiser, it's really an enablement and empowerment tool to enhance that conversation that you're having. You think about all the conversations you've had around naming opportunities. This kind of value by bringing the donor into this immersive reality is just, to me, leverages up the tools that you have immensely.
So, so here's an example of what a panoramic view. Take the roof off. This is basically developed from a blueprint. So the blueprint, one dimensional. We take the blueprint. It was transformed into with textures, with cinematic features, with beacons. But more importantly, here are the priorities. These are the priorities that have been created based on the need of the organization. But these are the funding priorities. And if you're a donor, if you're a prospect and you're looking at this and you're going to say, boy, that MRI, that really helped save me. But I was transported for 2.5 hours to get to the local hospital that had an MRI. The beauty of having an MRI in our community is I probably won't have to if I ever need it again. But my neighbors, anybody else, this is a priority for me as it is a priority for my community as it's been described. And that's where the virtual reality simulation comes into play. That's where the empathy of a donor starts to emerge, because they can actually see the impact of having this in their community, for their community, as well as, something that may have been life-saving for them or somebody else that they know. And the interesting part here is you could actually click on any one of these areas and it'll actually take you to the radiologist's office or the reception desk, or you want to just see, it's nice to have a bistro. And so things that individuals can actually identify with, or if it's based on, the functionality and it's fit, or it could be based on price. And they can actually be looking at what the naming opportunity cost of something like this would be. So when we're starting to look at it, it's the ability to actually go on this journey. The donor journey is important. It goes right back to Russell James and his comparison between a one-dimensional flat image, a two-dimensional image, or a 360-degree image that actually allows the individual to navigate themselves on any device, whether it's a smartphone, a tablet, or the computer. And the beauty of that is really straightforward. This technology didn't really exist the way it exists today. What was transformative over the last 12 years was how we've been able to actually move to microprocessors, to very small graphics cards, and how the internet speeds have increased. So whether it's the faster CPUs, the memory cards, the graphics cards, or whatever devices they're using, this is something that works on all smartphone devices. There's no longer, a lag or a latency to this. It's really compressed information that allows individuals to actually go and click on areas. And the beauty of doing it this way is that you can actually be measuring the impact that you're and measuring the number of visits that are coming to specific areas. So you can be looking at going to any one of these areas and selecting one, taking you to that area. Once you can actually now go and navigate around in this, and it's a link that is sent. And that link, in many instances, is built into your CRM. So you can actually know who's clicking, who's opening, where are they going, and then getting some insights for your cultivation, for your outreach, and for your conversations with your donors. So when we come into this, we can actually go into a specific area. You can actually, once you're in that area, we can actually click on and see what some of the other naming opportunities might be, or more importantly, just click on a naming opportunity. Here, you'll have the description, and then you'll have the AI description outlining specifically what this is, why it's important, why this is a priority area for donors to be aware of, and how they can be integrating within
The
this.
new MRI lobby is a welcoming and calming space designed to ease
So the
patients'
description
anxiety before their scans.
is
Soft,
seen on
neutral
the
colors and
screen
comfortable
here,
seating create a
but it's
relaxing
also
atmosphere. Large,
every room
informative
will
displays
have
provide
an
educational content
audio,
about MRI
video
procedures,
described
helping patients understand what to expect.
space
A
that
self-check-in
talks
kiosk
about the
streamlines the arrival
priorities
process,
for that
reducing
donor
wait
to be
times.
aware of.
The lobby
So it
features a
actually
dedicated area
explains a
for
lot of
patient
the
screening
different
pre-inspired
elements
artwork
that may be in the
contributing to a
back of their
tranquil
heads
the
that
space is
they
wheelchair
may
accessible and includes a
eventually,
children's
when they
play area
connect
to
with you
accommodate
or you
families.
connect with
Staff
them,
members
to
are
look at
readily
what
available at a
might be feasible. So when we're looking at where philanthropy and fundraising is going in the future, we're looking constantly at how can we be innovating? How can we be communicating with our donors the way our donors are communicating to find out about other things in their life, their finances. They want to buy a car. They're going online and checking it out. They're looking at doing shopping. They're doing their shopping online. And philanthropy should be no different. How do we incorporate a lot of this within that framework? And James, when we start to look at this from a planning perspective, from a return on investment perspective for donor dollars, we can see this as a important tool for fundraisers, regardless of what type of organization they're involved with.
So you're basically providing a lot of neurostimulation here, neurostimulation, going back to Russell's work and getting people excited about it. But I think building that technological literacy and collaboration within the organization is something that shouldn't be overlooked, because you're really going to be equipping your team to participate in this AI revolution that's occurring, and really empower and build much stronger fundraising operations and preserve institutional memory. If there's turnover in the field or one of your key people leave, you've got this archive of collaboration and skills that has been embedded in the organization.
So when we start to look at how do we benefit donors, families, advisors, with this type of a platform, it's clear. It's clear what we want them to see. There may be changes. We're working with an organization that one of their departments is 20% of it is getting reorganized, but that's not a major issue. It's important for the organization to best demonstrate what it is that they are looking at. Many campaigns, and James, maybe you can talk about this, but many campaigns, don't launch until they actually have all the drawings in place. This is all about creating an imagination for, some organizations to actually have something to say, this isn't our final, but we want to show you what we're envisioning and how it ties into whether it's a planning study or a feasibility study, or how it can be actually utilized for campaign leadership.
Yeah, it's adaptive. I mean, in the past we spent a lot of time developing case statements and printing things up and trying to get answers from architects and people who are going to use this space. This all becomes adaptive technology that can turn around, within 48 hours, less, 2 hours really. So when, I was involved in a major campaign, building a major hospital, along the way, new technologies came into play that had to be adapted to the campaign, what we needed money for, etc. So over that 5 years campaign, I mean, there were revolutions in lots of areas of healthcare. Having tools like this would have allowed us to shorten that turnaround time, and reconfigure the naming opportunities and the pricing models around those based on what the developments were.
See, again, touching on what you're looking at, major gift presentations, cultivation, virtual events. People can attend an event. They can actually do this as a way of showcasing what's being envisioned. And then on campaign microsites. So exactly, what many of the organizations might be updating their websites, having this on a website is another way of providing information and insights for your prospects. And then on the ongoing stewardship, the ability to continually update. A donor wants to move. They've given you $50,000. They want to move to a $100,000 naming opportunity. There's an opportunity. They can actually be looking at what might be a named space at $100,000, and that might be something that might be tying in not only with their current giving, but it might be blended giving. They might actually say, as part of my overall giving, I might look at leaving something in my estate, and this is what I might be looking at doing. So it's an opportunity not only to take that good annual mid-level donor to actually look at moving them into a major gift, if not a transformative giving scenario. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time. If you have any questions for James or myself, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have. But our next session, our next webinar episode number 15, is focusing on artificial intelligence, something that everyone is talking about. We're receiving a lot of inquiries from organizations that are just looking at what type of AI is the right AI for them. And we've got a lot of expertise in terms of building out these types of models, but more importantly, it's changing. If you asked us a year ago what would be the right AI model, it's not the answer that we're giving today. AI technology is changing so rapidly, and we are trying to not only utilize what's best, but actually build our own. So we're looking forward to having you join us for that. But thank you very much. And Chief, if there are any questions people can ask.
Of course.
And it's going to be empowering, not smarter giving, but smarter giving.
Improving smarter slides.
Yeah. We should have used AI to spell check. Okay, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks ever so much. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay.